Opinions are mixed, and there's more criticism than praise. So, how did Trump behave at this G7 summit? How does he reinterpret the peace deal he wants to sign with Iran? What exactly is President Trump up to? Also, Axios reported that there's a rift between hawks and doves within the White House. The hawks clearly, well, they don't agree, right? Not exactly clear, but they're skeptical of Trump's Iran deal. So, first of all, is this true or false? What exactly is Trump's logic? This is the key analysis Fang Wei is bringing you today. All right, there's plenty of other news too. Welcome to Good Morning America with Fang Wei. Hello to our YouTube audience and hello to our listeners on Sound of Hope, Silicon Valley FM 96.1. All right, let's get straight to the point and talk about today's top story. President Trump is currently in a spa town in France called Evian-les-Bains. It's quite a mouthful. Some Chinese media translate it as Yiyun Town, called Evian. Yeah, Yiyun Town. He's attending the G7, the summit of the world's 7 major powers. But his moves are bold, unprecedented. Not only did he meet with 6 of the 7 leaders in the past 2 days, but he also invited the leaders of Egypt, the UAE, and Qatar to attend. And of course, France also invited the Ukrainian president, Zelensky. Trump held bilateral talks with them all in one day. Note, these weren't multilateral talks, not just a group meeting, but bilateral, one-on-one meetings. So President Trump is actually busier at the G7 than at the White House, and even more effective. Because at the White House, you're hosting guests, and as the host, you're swamped. Now France is the host, and Trump is the one visiting. So round after round of talks to solve problems, reshaping today's global diplomatic relations according to his own will. Besides those leaders, the host also invited the presidents or prime ministers of Brazil, India, Kenya, South Korea, and Syria. Among them, Syria's interim president, Shakawi, also became a new guest, which is quite noteworthy. So this G7 has almost become like a new UN Security Council, solving world security issues, hasn't it? Except this time, the CCP and Russia are excluded. But this is indeed due to President Trump's presence. It's a huge influence. You know, at Trump's first G7 after taking office last year, he left on the very last day. He didn't even finish the last day before leaving Canada. Why? Because back in June last year, there was the threat of war with Iran, the 12-day war with Iran. So he wasn't there. But now at the G7 in France, after Trump stayed for the full 3 days, it has effectively become a place for solving world security issues. Now, yesterday's meeting between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky was a highlight, but the details are very interesting. We'll get to that later. Okay, let's talk about the Iran issue first. Let's start with what Trump said during his meeting with the leader of Qatar at the G7. Trump said that if the Iranian regime gets nuclear weapons, the consequences would be unimaginable. You might think he's targeting Israel, but this time, while Israel is hitting them, they are hitting you, Gulf nations, instead. So President Trump said that the Iranian regime is extremely irrational and must never possess nuclear weapons. Therefore, our agreement must go beyond just banning Iran from developing nuclear weapons. They can neither develop nor buy or use any other method to obtain nuclear weapons. If they do so, we will have to destroy them, as in hell will be with them. Now, why did President Trump specifically say this to the leader of Qatar, Al Thani? It's because among the Gulf nations, Qatar is, one could say, the biggest sympathizer of the Iranian regime. Why is Qatar the biggest sympathizer of the Iranian regime? I'll go into more detail on this later in the show. This is related to the fact that Qatar recently, well, not just possibly, but reportedly, gave Iran a large sum of money. I'll explain that later. Anyway, President Trump said the U.S. hopes to establish a very good relationship with Iran, but preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons remains the top priority. All right, let's look at some other related facts. Another fact is that Trump said at the G7 that ships have already begun moving, and he predicts that oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz will be fully open by this Friday. As oil begins to flow, oil prices are falling rapidly while the stock market is rising, and that is indeed the case. If you check oil prices now, Brent crude, which I checked an hour ago this morning, has already dropped below $80. That's the lowest point since the war began in March, and West Texas Intermediate is already at $77. If you ask me, I think it will head toward $50 within a month or two. This is the impact on oil after the signing of the agreement. Additionally, another point is that Iran's deputy foreign minister, Ravanchi, said today that Iran's chief negotiator, Their parliament speaker, Galibov, will attend the signing ceremony for the end of war agreement between the US and Iran in Switzerland. According to Iranian state television, the deputy foreign minister said the signing will be in Switzerland, but the exact location hasn't been determined yet. After the agreement is signed, the next round of negotiations will begin immediately. Furthermore, the Iranian deputy foreign minister said the U.S. representative will be Vice President Vance, attending on behalf of Washington. On the Iranian side, it will be represented by the parliament speaker, Galibov, as mentioned before. Just as he said that, Switzerland announced that the agreement will be held at a resort near Lucerne, Switzerland, called the Bergenstock. All right, so those are the latest developments. Let's get into today's news highlights, the most important ones. The U.S. online media outlet Axios reported that CIA Director Ratcliffe expressed deep concern over the Iran agreement, saying that Iran says one thing but does another. Iran's actions are inconsistent with the officials negotiating with the U.S. What did Axios say? It said the White House is currently split into hawks and doves. The hawks are represented by Secretary of State Rubio, Defense Secretary Hegseth, and CIA Director Ratcliffe. You'll notice these names were also in the Venezuela Situation Room, directing the capture of Maduro at the time. Those few in the White House Situation Room. I don't quite remember if it was at the White House or Mar-a-Lago. Well, CIA Director Ratcliffe said our intelligence detected that they say one thing to the United States, but they say something else among themselves. Well, I think this is completely true. I think we should all know that Iran's so-called negotiators and hardliners are actually on the same side. So they say one thing to the US, but internally it's another. Now, as for the doves, the Axios doves are Vance, Vice President Vance, and Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, and Witkoff. Actually, yesterday I watched Vice President Vance's media interview in detail regarding the Iran nuclear deal. The main spokesperson for the US media is Vice President Vance. So the media explicitly asked him, Vance, have you heard that you were the architect of the Iran nuclear deal? Are you the designer? Vance didn't deny it. Since he didn't deny it, you could say he tacitly admitted it. So indeed, Vance is the one behind this agreement, or the ideas mainly came from him. Of course, there's no doubt that whether it's the doves or the hawks, the final decision maker is President Trump. So in the end, Trump makes the call. Okay, the doves' idea is not only to use force to block Iran's path to nuclear weapons, but also to use massive benefits to entice Iran to give them up and take the right path to rebuild their country. So does this Axios report make sense? I think it does. Even though Axios is a relatively left-leaning media outlet, I think it makes sense. Why? Well, let's talk about the hawks first. The hawks' view is that you can't trust the evil Iranian regime. Force must be the primary tool. If you're going to do it, go all the way. I actually believe this and agree with it. Then, the Dove's view is that they don't think the US should intervene heavily in the internal regime changes of other countries. It's inconsistent with the MAGA mission of this US administration. What is MAGA? It's Make America Great Again. To make America stronger, we need to focus our energy here. Well, regardless, the decisions are of course made by President Trump. As for President Trump's attitude, in many G7 meetings, not interviews, but meetings, he has actually expressed it quite clearly. He said, I don't believe in changing foreign governments because the trouble is too great. So President Trump's view on this is as follows. I'll give you an interpretation, not a direct quote, but this is what I gathered. His point is that changing a government is useless if you don't change people's hearts. It will only lead to getting bogged down. Let me say it again. Trump concentrated 20% of the US Navy in the Middle East to strike Iran, essentially dealing them a heavy blow. The reason is that Trump wanted to punish, this is Fang Wei's commentary, he wanted to punish the Iranian authorities for massacring their people, which happened in early January. At the same time, he didn't want this punitive campaign to fail halfway. That's why he concentrated such massive force. In other words, if you're going to strike, you must strike to win. That's the idea. But as for whether to fight for regime change, for Trump, the answer is no. He said it himself. I don't believe in regime change. I don't believe in regime change. Now, Trump's reasoning is based on 2 points. One is the experience in Iraq and Afghanistan. So he believes that if people's hearts don't change, changing the regime is useless. Of course, in Afghanistan, that's absolutely the case. in Iraq, it's hard to say. Over the long term, it's actually been quite effective. But anyway, I'm talking about Trump's thoughts, my interpretation of his thoughts. He believes that if hearts don't change, regime change is useless. That's one example. Another is his warning to Israel. He said this at G7. He said, to catch one bad guy, you're going to tear down the whole building? How can that work? What he means is the bad guys are Hezbollah. So you're going to tear down the whole building just because Hezbollah is hiding somewhere and you destroy the whole area? His point is that to catch one bad guy, you end up tearing down a building and offending many people. They'll become new enemies, and the cycle of revenge will never end. That's Trump's point. So what exactly is the dovish path? It's clear now that Trump has already adopted a dovish approach. His path is the carrot and the stick, seeking peace through strength. If Iran wants to develop nuclear weapons, we'll maintain our strike deterrence while also showing goodwill. Give them a chance for rebirth. What does rebirth mean? First, give up nuclear weapons. Second, change their expansionist and hegemonic behavior in the Middle East. So how do we achieve this? He has three methods. The first method is to shift the blame onto the previous leaders. He's flattering the new leaders. The idea is, look, it was all their fault, but they've been eliminated, and you're a new group. We can trust you. You're smart, rational, and not extreme. This is what Trump said directly at G7. Does Trump know the new leaders? I don't think he knows any of them. He hardly knows any, but he'll say they're smart, rational, and not extreme. Okay, that's the first approach. As for this approach, well, I'll comment later on what I think of it. Second is giving benefits. What are the short-term benefits? The short-term benefits are real. Israeli media is reporting that Qatar and the UAE have already given Iran a lot of money. Three sums of money. The first is a $1 billion credit line. The second is the $6 billion credit line. The third is $12 billion in Iranian funds frozen in Qatar that can be returned to Iran. So what will Iran do with it? Use it to buy things. Not weapons, but goods purchased through Qatar. So they'll buy grain, consumer goods, and so on. This is a short-term benefit. So 10 plus 60 plus 120, that's $190 billion in total. How much did the US contribute? Not a single cent. That's why Trump can openly say now that in signing a peace agreement with Iran, the US didn't spend a dime. Is that true? Yes, it is. But someone did pay. Qatar and the UAE paid. Of course, strictly speaking, you can't say they paid because that $12 billion was Iran's money, just frozen. Iran has a lot of money in overseas accounts, so it's just about returning that money to them. That's the short-term situation. In the long term, the Gulf states have now pledged $300 billion to rebuild Iran. Where will this $300 billion come from? The Gulf states will provide it. And where will that money be spent? Certainly not on reconstruction. Let me put it this way. Where did this $300 billion figure come from? It's widely accepted that the US struck Iran for 40 days. 40 days of bombing. Actually, 42 days to be exact, with 2 more days recently. After 42 days, $300 billion worth of Iran's so-called military facilities were destroyed. So Iran needs this much money for reparations, but as for where it's spent, it absolutely cannot go back into building military facilities. It must be used for civilian infrastructure. That's the condition for the $300 billion. So what does this mean? It's the Gulf states and the US saying that as long as you give up nuclear weapons, we can turn from enemies to friends and give you the resources to rebuild your country. Do you want that? You're a new generation of leader now. Do you want to avoid the same path as your predecessors? If you want to, turn over a new leaf. Or what's the phrase? If you choose to do the right thing, we will provide the resources to rebuild your country. Of course, some say that Trump's nuclear deal doesn't mention ballistic missiles at all, and it doesn't address the issue of supporting regional proxies. But if Iran's new leadership is willing to become friends, why keep causing trouble? Naturally, they wouldn't build ballistic missiles or fund those proxies. These problems would essentially solve themselves. Okay, so this is what I've gathered from media reports combined with my own analysis. This is the logic behind President Trump's current deal. But are there risks? Of course there are. The risk is that Iran is playing the US. After 60 days, if nothing is negotiated, they just stall. It's easy for Iran to wait out 60 days and sign nothing, right? And by then, with the midterms approaching, Iran might bet that Trump won't dare to strike. If he does, and it costs him the midterms, then what? At that point, they'd have Trump backed into a corner. So, indeed, is there a risk for Trump? Absolutely. So, what does Vance have to say about this? What does this so called deal architect say? He makes 2 points. First, he says these 60 days are not open ended. It's not some open ended thing where we just see where it goes. There must be a conclusion within 60 days. So, it's a very strict, interconnected 60-day period. That's the first point. Second, if Iran fails to honor the deal's commitments, meaning they don't give up their nuclear weapons, the US will resume military action. Now, will this work? Who knows? A viewer messaged me saying, Fengwei, just a few days ago you were talking about the best, middle, and worst case scenarios, and now you're supporting Trump's approach. That's a misunderstanding. I still stand by my best, middle, and worst case scenarios. What was the best case? It was the US and Israel exerting full pressure, rallying behind the Iranian prince, and letting the Iranian people solve their own country's freedom or dictatorship issues. And deal with the Mullah regime. I still believe that's the best case scenario. But I'm not the president, right? Trump is the president now. He made this decision, so we have to analyze it. I'm providing an analysis as a journalist. It doesn't mean I endorse it. Now, if you want my honest opinion, let me evaluate President Trump's approach. Well, I think it's just like what I wrote in my title. It's called Trump's Big Gamble, Trump's Big Gamble. He's taken a huge risk. Giving Iran such an opportunity to be reborn and rebuild. Okay, but then if he succeeds, if Iran really moves toward changing its behavior, then it would indeed be the cheapest way to resolve Iran's nuclear threat to the world, the Middle East and Israel, and the long-standing issue of the Middle East being a powder keg. The US can withdraw and return to the Americas and to Asia. This is what the US, last year's, what was it called? The US National Strategy. The two most important things in that strategy, rebuilding the Americas, the Monroe Doctrine, and returning to Asia. So if this is accomplished, Vance will definitely score points. Vance's reelection, meaning his next presidential run, would be promising. Why am I telling you this? I believe that whoever Vance runs against, the reason I say his presidential run would be promising is because basically, looking at the current situation, whoever Trump endorses will be the next president. So if Vance handles this beautifully and finally gets the Middle East situation settled, then Vance will score a point. We all know Rubio, in the past year or year and a half, has really shown great style, right? His handling of the Venezuela issue was so beautiful, truly impressive. So I think Rubio is already far ahead in scoring points, and now Vance is using this opportunity to score points too. Well, if this big gamble succeeds, Vance will indeed see a boost in his prestige. But if it fails, that's another story. Now, what's the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario is Iran says one thing and does another, right? And in the end, they still go head to head with the US. Then what? Then it's still war, still strikes. But in this, Trump isn't being entirely bad to them. You know what 60 days means? The meaning of a 60-day ceasefire. When is 60 days later? It's August 20th. August 20th. We all know the agreement was officially signed on June 19th. And then 60 days later is August 18th. By August 18th, the World Cup is over, the National Day celebrations are over, and there are only 70 days left until the midterm elections. Just 75 days. Is it possible Trump might wait until after the election to strike you, right? Why must he strike before the election? So, given Iran these 75 days, can they build a nuclear weapon? Most of their experts are dead, and their current, enriched uranium materials are buried underground, and their centrifuges are mostly blown to bits. Can they make a nuclear weapon in 75 days? The possibility is very low, so Trump can choose to strike them after the midterms, can't he? So on this point, I think the worst case scenario is nothing more than this. I think this is an aspect worth noting. Of course, having said all this, do you agree with my view, or do you agree with my interpretation of Trump? Feel free to leave a comment. I know this is a very controversial issue. Among some of my influencer friends, we've had some heated debates. I'm basically an isolationist. I'm in the minority, but I believe my view is accurate. Okay. So, do you agree with my view? Write agree or disagree, and tell me why. I encourage debate. Disagreeing with Feng Wei in the comments is never a problem. I'll read it and think, hey, maybe you're right and I'm wrong. So I think there's absolutely no problem with expressing different opinions. Just don't use insults. What's the point? It's meaningless and adds nothing but negativity. Okay, that's that. Oh, for comments, you must subscribe first. So I'd like to ask new viewers to subscribe. That way you can comment and you won't miss other Feng Wei Time shows. Because my program is about looking at today's news and understanding what's going on with America. That's one of the goals of my show. I think it'll be beneficial to you. So remember to subscribe right now, and turn on the bell so you won't miss notifications. Also, one more thing. On Feng Wei's channel, called Feng Wei Time, right? YouTube has added a very prominent button. This button is called Community. You know, community and post are two different things. Community isn't post, it's called Community. After you click in, anyone can comment. So tell me what topics you want Feng Wei to talk about. Others can see it, and you can like or comment to show support. I'll check it every day. If a comment gets the most support, I'll spend time the next day on that topic. A viewer asked 3 weeks ago if I could talk about Taiwan becoming the 51st US state. Okay, that's interesting. If you're interested, I'll talk about it. You might notice what you're seeing today is this is already in the community section. This is a post, but on Feng Wei's channel. Right here, you see? You need to go to Feng Wei Times main page. It's called the home page. Then click community to enter. So leave the topics you want me to talk about, okay? Others can also go there and vote. Then Feng Wei can talk about that topic when the time comes, okay? Okay, next, a small piece of news. Small, but significant. U.S. Central Command released a photo and video saying the guided missile destroyer USS Delbert Black, while sailing in the Arabian Sea yesterday, completed a vertical replenishment at sea with a U.S. supply ship. The supply ship sent a helicopter to land and deliver everything the destroyer needed, even including the sailors, mail, and other items. What's the significance? Well, destroyers at sea usually have to return to port for maintenance every so often, but now these U.S. Navy destroyers aren't returning to port. They're not returning. The U.S. military is staying on full duty and alert. Whatever they need, we ship it over. So, what I want to say is that this is a small piece of news, but I'm talking about it specifically because it has deep implications. Central Command releasing this message isn't for nothing. Why release it? It means we're here, and the naval ports won't be either. Ready for war at any time. That's the point. It shows the strength of the American stick in the carrot and stick approach, sending a hint. Iran International, the media outlet, Iran International, it's not an Iranian government media outlet, it's a media outlet that's anti-Iranian government. It says the US and Qatar recently reached a financial and maritime arrangement with Iran that will provide billions of dollars to Iran in exchange for free passage for Qatari tankers and ships in the Strait of Hormuz. And the key is right here. This agreement, this arrangement, was secretly approved by the United States about a month ago. Okay, this channel began to strengthen after the ceasefire. The report says Qatar has been seeking security guarantees, fearing its facilities in the Gulf would be attacked again by Iran during the war. So they're using this method, right? As part of this arrangement, Iran requested withdrawal rights for some of its deposits in Qatar, okay? And some payments could be disguised as fees for tankers passing through the Strait of Hormuz. So now there's also a broad credit line of up to $1 billion that's been opened, which Iran can use to buy goods. So what's really going on here? Two questions. First, why is Qatar doing this? Actually, it's not just Qatar. Even the UAE is reportedly doing this, privately funneling money to Iran. So what's with Qatar? That's the first point. The second question is, why did the US agree? That's the second question. Qatar is a very unique country. You know, a while back, well, not a while back, last year, Israel even bombed Qatar because Hamas members went there for a meeting. They bombed Qatar, which made Qatar very, very angry. Finally, when Trump met with Netanyahu, Trump said, "Hey, Bibi, call him and apologize right now. Apologize to the Emir of Qatar." Emir is the title of their head of state. Apologize to him. That's how it was resolved. So what's the deal with Qatar? Qatar is indeed the one among the 6 Gulf nations with the best relationship with Iran. Why? Well, three reasons. First, they have a relationship of mutual interest. They share oil fields. You know that massive one called the South Pars gas field? The northern part is in Qatar, and the southern part is in Iran. So both sides share the world's largest gas field. So their interests are aligned, okay? They don't want to ruin the relationship. If either side acts up, then what, right? That's the first point. Second, Qatar's relationship with Saudi Arabia, the leader of the Gulf states, isn't great. They're always trying to step out from Saudi's shadow, and Saudi often tries to keep them in line. For instance, back in 2017, Saudi Arabia and four other Gulf nations blockaded Qatar. Now, Qatar is a tiny country, only about 270,000 people, and during that block, donating to them for humanitarian aid, so they are very, very grateful. But Qatar is not a country that just falls into Iran's arms. It is also quite wary of Iran. It is a Sunni regime, a Sunni country, while Iran is a Shia country. This in itself creates a sense of wariness. Secondly, Qatar has a very good relationship with the United States, so Qatar is not exactly playing all sides, but playing many sides. The US military, it is an important US ally in the Middle East. The airbase there, the US airbase, is also one of the most important US air bases in the Middle East. So they get along with everyone. That's the situation. So of course there is some kindness toward Iran here. They are afraid that Iran might sabotage the oil fields. So it's basically giving money to please them, to buy off Iran. That's the gist of it. The question is, how did the US agree? This is what's called the carrot and the stick. This is part of the stick, because President Trump would never give money to Iran.